Welcome to Community Conversations. My name is Barbie Johnson Lewis, and I am President of Board of Directors for NASW Maryland. And I am co-chair with Maria Smith, Social Workers Unraveling Racism, a committee with NASW Maryland chapter. Today's interview, Community Conversation, The Time is Right for International Social Work with Stephanie Asare Nti. Stephanie is the keynote speaker for the annual Social Work Virtual Conference, which would be held on March 24th through the 25th. It is my honor to introduce you to Stephanie. Stephanie takes a compassionate approach to social justice and the ability of the people in the human family to flourish and to grow. Stephanie founded Social Workers Beyond Borders, drawing on her vision and determination to provide international cross-bordering, learning, and connection-building opportunities for social work students and practitioners. Stephanie has been practicing international social work for 20 years. Her areas of expertise include domestic abuse work with men, early childhood mental health, and clinical practice. Stephanie has lived in several countries and worked for international organizations such as the United Nations and the World Bank, and taught in a number of schools of social work. Stephanie served on the NASW National Board as the regional representative for Maryland, New Jersey, and Delaware chapters. Stephanie has also co-authored a number of social work publications and policies development in the area of expertise. She is also the president-elect of the NASW Maryland Board of Directors. Please welcome Stephanie Asare Nti. Wow, welcome and thank you, Stephanie, for taking the time out to sit with us and have a conversation. So I'd like to get started. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into international social work.
Thank you, Barbie, and it's always a pleasure meeting with you. And I guess I want to first start off by wishing you a happy Social Work Month, and also to acknowledge that we just celebrated World Social Work Day on March the 15th. And we've also just celebrated Social Work Day at the United Nations. And it was the 38th annual Social Work Day at the United Nations, with a theme of moving toward food security for all, the role of social work. So that's kind of how I want to start greeting you and just acknowledging all the amazing international social work events that are happening, especially in this month.
Wow.
Yeah.
Didn't know that. I actually did not know that was happening. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So again, going back to my question, what inspired you to be a part of international social work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think to answer that, I kind of have to go back into my own background and my own upbringing. So I need to start by saying that I have lived in a couple of continents growing up. And I was actually born in Germany, and that's something, Barbie, you and I share. We were both born in Germany. And I have Ghanaian parents. So my parents are from Ghana, West Africa. And then we also moved to Canada in my adolescent years. And then from there, we transitioned to the United States. So just from that alone, you can see that my worldview has been shaped by quite a number of influences globally. And I've had an appreciation for different people, foods, culture, different environments, and recognizing challenges that come with all of that, but just really appreciating also the strength and resilience of people from a global lens, and really having opportunities to meet and discuss and talk with people on issues that are important to them. And so I think I've always had a keen interest in learning about other people, values, what kinds of issues they're grappling with, and how to see it from a non-judgmental perspective, but being really open and being really curious about where people are coming from. So that's kind of my love affair with international work, because I come from an international background. So that's kind of how I started getting interested in the work. And then becoming a social worker and looking at global issues has become such an important lens that I use, because I've realized that there's a lot of commonality among people, even though we're different, and I acknowledge the differences and I celebrate the differences. I also see that the social work profession highlights what it is that we have in common in terms of social injustices or certain issues that affect really humankind. And that is not separated by borders.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, wow. So you come with a large background, array of background, and being in different countries. But you also talked about when I read your bio earlier, you mentioned that you worked with the World Bank, and the United Nations. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Sure, happy to. And it didn't start there. I have been a social worker, like I said, for 20 years. And in my career path, I focused a lot on working with domestic abuse, particularly initially with survivors. And then at some point, I transitioned to working with abusers, those who actually use abuse in intimate partner relationships. I've also done a lot of work in mental health and also working with children, especially on early childhood development. And so I've been, social working for a long time in different areas and really building my skill and my expertise along the way. And I started to realize, again, the intersectionality between what I was doing and working, of the work that was also being done globally, and wanting to tap into what was happening on a global front. And so all I really did was I internationalized my expertise, right? I just took it to a place where it would be recognized and transferred those skills into other settings. And that's kind of how I started working in the international arena. So it's really honing in on the skills, the core skills that we have as social workers, and then just internationalizing that and making it applicable in different settings and with different populations. And of course, that requires, an important skill around cultural competence, which we know is an ongoing learnings, right? So we don't know everything about every culture naturally, but it's about the constant learning and asking and seeking and being open to being, involved, being open to being even wrong sometimes and having to, correct mistakes. It's all of that, right? And so I took that work that I was doing domestically and I started getting involved in global initiatives. And it started with working for non-governmental organizations, which are smaller in scope, but are also extremely powerful and kind of doing some work abroad, especially in Africa, in Ghana specifically, and Lesotho, which is the Kingdom of Lesotho, which is a country inside of South Africa. Right. And from there, I started to also recognize that the skills that I had developed over the years, even around global health, particularly in the early 2000s, my focus was on HIV and AIDS. And so that years later offered an opportunity at working for the United Nations under a joint program on HIV and AIDS, which was headquartered in New York. And so I became I believe it was a policy advisor. I'm, working specifically with heads of state, working with ministers of health, ministers of finance, working with first ladies, and working with the United Nations HIV envoy for HIV/AIDS in Africa to really help support member countries to scale up their HIV prevention work, resources, information, especially around the stigma that was associated with supporting various campaigns that would allow for people to access treatment. And so it kind of started, that's where I kind of got pulled in terms of doing it from a United Nations lens, which was huge at the time because that was the first time I'd had a chance to have access to so many countries and being at the General Assembly and seeing member countries and representatives coming from around the world who are speaking to the progress of what their countries are doing around certain global issues. It was, it was powerful. And then the World Bank happened many years later, because again, I've been working in my core field, so that was also done locally, right? And so I then took a job at the World Bank, and interestingly, they have a domestic abuse prevention program, which focuses on supporting staff, spouses, and dependents as well. But the program that I work for specifically within the World Bank is the Domestic Abuse Prevention Program, which offers counseling support to individuals who experience abuse and individuals who are using abuse. Because the truth is, Barbie, people are people everywhere. Yes. Right? People are people everywhere. Yes. We're dealing with the same issues globally, domestically. These are global social issues. And so I applaud the work that the initiative that they have to really support staff around this very pressing and unfortunate, ongoing issue that the world is grappling with.
Right. And as you said, all problems is globally across the world, but I don't think, sometimes here we understand that. And I think it's wonderful that you are here to kind of, again, almost introduce international social work to us. And you have a lot of passion around the work that you're doing, and much so that you started a program, your own program, your own work around this. Tell us a little bit about the Social Workers Beyond Borders. Tell us about the program you founded.
Yeah, so this was many years ago. So I want to say about 20 years ago, or somewhere around there. I had this vision that we needed to not look at boundaries and borders to separate us from doing good social work practice, and that we need to go beyond the borders. We need to go, see the world almost like without borders, because at one point we didn't have borders to begin with. And so it's really important that I recognize that there was a space for social workers to practice global social work. And coming out of grad school, I wanted to do international field placements, and there weren't any available. It was like, no, we only have, placements, in the city where you're living, maybe in another city over, but it wasn't recognized that there was a relevance or an importance anyway to doing a global internship or something outside of the country. And so I struggled with that because, again, like I said, I've always had big picture, big lens, and I didn't like the limitation that was put on our profession, that we could only work with communities in our neighborhoods, which was an important work, of course. But I also believe that our practice can be informed by other practices that could be even better than what we're doing domestically. And why not learn that? Why not bring that lens to the work we're doing locally by having opportunities to become allies and partners and study under and learn from people from around the world? And so I struggled with that. And I would say, similar to when I graduated from my MSW, it was again a challenge. There wasn't an easy transition to do the work in terms of funding or placements or places to stay. You kind of had to figure things out on your own. And so it discouraged a lot of my peers to doing an international social work because it was too much effort. It was too ambiguous. It almost seemed scary because you'd be on your own and there weren't those supports in place. And so I had an aha moment like, hey, if this is in need, social workers, we're innovative. When we see a need, we find solutions.
Right.
A solution that I came up with was, why not develop a program that would support social work students at the undergrad and the grad level and beyond to having securely matched in terms of like the area of interest and skill set and safe opportunities globally. Yeah. And so I started with the continent that I know best, which is Africa. And I offered opportunities for students to have a cross-border experience, cross-education experience, where they could actually do a field placement in a particular, at the time it was in Ghana specifically. We ended up moving among other countries, but it started in Ghana specifically, where they would do their block placement in Ghana and get full credit for it. And they would do it over the summer. So it became like a 3-month blocked placement, and they wouldn't do it over this, of course, over the school year because they were in full-time instruction, but they would do their placement in a different setting. And then they would do courses and orientation and still get lectures and just kind of better integrate and totally immerse them in the culture and being, with different families. Some individuals stayed with host families, others were housed at the University of Ghana. Because the accommodations there again were very much fitting for what we needed, and so it just made sense to offer another opportunity. And it was quite a good turnout of students who wanted to be part of this. And so it's been running for years, and we've had different countries add on over the years. We've also had to slow down and reevaluate how we're doing things because sometimes I realized just to not further use a decolonizing lens on international social work, we don't want the experience of always having us going to another country, meaning Canadians and Americans. That's who this program was really targeted for, but also allowing for reciprocity, having social workers from other countries also come to the United States or Canada to offer them the same opportunity to learn and engage and interact, so that it becomes, so we decolonize this idea that we know best and that we're coming to, help other countries. Right. We don't want to give that narrative. We want to learn from you too. Indigenous practices, best practices, healing and self-care. All those things have come from rich indigenous lenses, and I wanted to offer that opportunity for people to come here as well. So we've done a lot of reevaluating over the years and reassessing and trying to make it much more equitable and just using a decolonized lens in this work.
Yeah, because what comes to mind is the Peace Corps, right? When I think of opportunities to go overseas and work, so to speak, and it's the humanitarian focus with Peace Corps, but it doesn't necessarily about social work, right? It's just going over, and again, somewhat in that, it sort of feels sort of like in that colonizing way. We're here to help you figure out, how to irrigate your soil, or whatever the issue is, and what Peace Corps does, right? It seems like we're the experts and we're coming here to help, but that's not necessarily how we should be looking at international global social work, right?
Can I say something to that, Barbie? Because you raised a really important point. I had the opportunity to connect with Jody Olson, Dr. Jody Olson, who was the director of Peace Corps from 2018 to 2021, and is a social worker, right? She's an MSW. Great. She is a powerhouse. And she led with such cultural humility that wasn't even the case there. There was really this idea of, we are coming to learn, we are coming to be non-judgmental, we are coming to support and ally with those on the ground who are doing the work. And so not using that, again, that lens of, we're coming to show you the way, we're coming to bring our own values and impose them on you. And I think that comes with the social work lens. So when you have social workers in positions such as these, like Dr. Jody Olson, who was phenomenal and has made such a huge impact on the ground, and her leadership really spoke to the social work values of cultural humility, cultural competence, and respecting self-determination from their point of view, not ours, but theirs, right? Theirs, respecting what they consider to be family, what they consider to be community, and really being there to support that vision, I think, is what made her so successful. And it's not a surprise that she's a social worker, right? And so this is the value base that we bring in. So we're uniquely positioned to run international organizations, even like Peace Corps, because we bring the social work lens. And we bring the human rights lens, we bring the social justice lens, which is something that other professions don't necessarily have.
Right. And your program is doing that, and seems to be aligning with Greenpeace. So that's wonderful. That's wonderful. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about. Tell us more about what it means to cross a boundary. What is that about? What is cross-boundary learning? What is that about?
Yeah, so there's different ways that we are able to connect
cross-border.
Cross-border, right? So cross-border education, for example, is what I was doing with my students. It's what I offer to students who were engaging in international social work in my program. We were going into other places, leaving the country of origin or countries that we were living in, so like Canada and the United States specifically, and going into another country. The movement of people. So we actually went there, right? It was just a broad concept. And when we think about international social work, there are many different ways to practice it. That is one way. We have to be mindful as well of how we do that, and how we go into other countries, what values we bring, just like I was saying earlier, so we're not imposing anything on people. But cross-border learning is something that happens when one group of people shift to another place to learn, and vice versa. And that was the process. And the reciprocity of that process is critical, that it happens not just one way, right? There are many different terms that are used for international social work. And I'm going to give you a few other examples, right? So we call it sometimes global social work, international social work, cross-national social work, and so forth. And I think maybe starting at what the definition of global social work is a good starting point, because we do have an offering that was given to us through IFSW in the General Assembly meeting and IASSW General Assembly back in July of 2014. And the global definition for social work is that it is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline that promotes social change and development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. So there are the principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversities are central to social work. And these are all underpinned by theories of social work, social sciences, humanities, and here's a key word, indigenous knowledges. Indigenous knowledges.
Yes,
Social
yes.
work engages people and structures to address life challenges and enhance well-being. And so this can be applied at the national and or regional levels. And so this offering that was given to us in terms of global definitions of social work is important because we need to keep that in mind when we're using terms like, international social work, cross-border social work. Does it align with this definition?
Mm, mm.
Right? Does it align?
Yeah, yeah.
How we're practicing, because it should be rooted in social justice, indigenous knowledges. So if
Yes.
your idea of international social work is going into another country to tell them how to do things, or to call, point your finger and say that's wrong, and judge
Right.
and have critical, feedback, and to work in isolation or to work with individuals and not communities, are you really practicing global social work? Or is it just perpetuating colonial social work in another country?
Right, right.
So we need to be careful not to mix it up and call it international social work when it's really just more of the same, using Western ideologies, Western practices,
Right.
Western
Right.
terminology, and not looking and digging deeper into what is the indigenous knowledge base that they're using, and how do we need to shift ourselves to tap into that.
Right, right.
Right? Which is why self-reflection and this cultural competence piece is so important. And at the root of it all is your own self-care, because you gotta, this is a lot of work. So you gotta be able to nurture yourself when you're challenging your own, perhaps, implicit biases, your own perceptions, your own value base that might contradict with this very definition. Yeah.
Well, to stay on where you're talking about implicit bias and colonizing and human rights, but people maybe in this country would say, maybe social workers would say, we have so many problems here. Why would we want to connect with other countries? They have their own systems. Why do this globally? What would you say to other social workers or other people that has that frame of mind?
I love that question,
thinking.
first of all. I love that question. It's a question I think I get asked the most, is why should I care? We got our own issues in our own backyards. How can we leave our own issues here and focus on country X, right? When we have our own issues here. And it's a valid question. We do have our own issues in our own backyards. But you'll find that the social issues that we have here are actually global issues. They're not limited to the United States. So if you think, for example, what is affecting our country the most? Poverty, right? We have health pandemics that we had. We're just coming out of COVID. Prior to that was, we had Ebola. HIV has been a global health pandemic. Are these limited just to the United States? Human trafficking,
No.
The flight of children, aging populations, right? Climate change, gender-based violence. Are these limited to the United States? The last time I checked, they weren't.
They were not.
They were not. And we can all, in our own work, whether you're in private, whether you're in macro, whether you're in meso, whether you're in direct service, you can relate to some of these issues coming up in the work that you're doing directly. Which is why we can't look at this as an isolated lens, but we have to look at the commonality of the world going through the same things, because again, people are people, right? And so we're facing the same global social issues worldwide. Look at what's happening with climate change, pollution. You look at what's happening in the water. Look at what happened in White Flint. It's also happening in many other parts of the world, with water being contaminated and people dying. Food security. That was a theme for the United Nations Social Work Day at the United Nations. That was a theme on food security. That is a global theme. We are running out of food, and quickly, right? We're also dealing with gender-based violence. We're also dealing with wars that are affecting us right here. It's happening right now in Russia and the Ukraine, but we are affected right here in our local, Maryland, state, because you've seen a rise in threats to your own security, right? There's also a rise in other things like food and gas and whatever else. And it also happened during COVID. There was a shortage because we're in a globalized system. Everything is globalized. Nothing happens or is produced in itself just here. We import and export from around the world. We go to many places. We're not limited to this island or this place, this corner of the world. We are in fact integrating every day economically, financially with other countries, we're investing in other countries and vice versa. So to say that we have our own problems is not looking at the larger ramifications and the larger connection between what's happening globally and what's happening locally. You'll also find that there's also more people coming into the United States, whether legally or illegally. And so whatever issues are happening globally in other countries are coming home, because you as the social worker are going to be dealing with this issue in your practice. So let's say there's a war going on, like there is right now in Ukraine. So let's say we have refugees coming into the United States. Same thing happened with Syria, Palestine, and on and on and on, right? We've had world wars and we've had everything else in between. Social workers are often the first people that get connected with individuals fleeing from war-torn countries. So if you're not familiar with what's happening around the world, or you don't care, then when they're in front of you, how are you going to do your best social work practice? How are you going to practice culturally with an empathic lens? Right. If you don't see that problem that's happening there is now literally in front of you. And what we call this kind of work is internationally related domestic practice and advocacy. And it's a term that Dr. Lynn Healy, who is a pioneer in the field, has introduced in the literature, that we need to look at international social work, not just as going abroad, but also it coming right to our front doors, wherever we are in the world, right here in Maryland. And so now you're dealing with border issues. You're dealing with cross-border issues, especially around the, Mexico had, and all the, individuals who were trying to come in from other parts of Latin America, being separated from their children, being put into detention centers. It was social workers who were doing that work. So you have to understand, right, that we are still involved in that work right in US soil. So in Texas, a group of social workers led by Jennifer Thompson, who's the executive director of the New Jersey NASW. She was part of a group of social workers that went to the border to support that initiative, those efforts to make sure that families were at least receiving services once they got to the US, and to help maybe with reunification with their children, right? And so that was domestic work, and yet it had an international component. Right. You see? So it's just an example that you can't afford not to care, because it's going to be knocking on your front door before you know it.
Right. Well, and I think some of that has to do with not really understanding where we are globally, or how we sit on the planet, because we think of the United States, we think somehow we sit by ourselves. We're a mass in itself. We are part of the Americas. We're part of the South America, and we're in North America. We sit on one large piece of land with a number of countries, but I don't think we understand those pieces. But I'm excited because also talk a little bit about continuing to talk about this international social work. And you're now the president-elect of NASW, and you'll be actually starting in June, will be taking over as president. But how do you envision continuing to educate and to I'm not even sure what the word to use, to invite more social workers into this field, or this understanding of global international social work?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Barbie, for your leadership, for the many years of being on the board in different capacities. You have been a champion for human rights. And so you leave this position with a legacy that I hope I'm able to continue to lead. Because we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and I'm not bringing in like something that's going to revolutionize the chapter. I'm building off of the legacy and the work that Daphne McClellan, who we all know retired after 15, 16 years of service as the ED, it's that momentum and that sacrifice and that work and those foundations that you all created over the years that allow me to continue on that path and to really contribute in a way by bringing in the international lens. So not doing anything different, but just recognizing that whether we're realizing it or not, we're part of a global agenda. Right. We're part of a global social work agenda. The work that we're doing is a global agenda. It is not isolated to Maryland. It is actually a global agenda in the world. And so this is why the International Federation of Social Workers and the International Associations of Schools of Social Work and International Council of Social Welfare, which are like our international sister organizations, they have come up with these very important themes that we need to be concerned about as social workers globally. And that, again, speaks to social and economic equalities within countries and between regions, recognizing always the dignity and worth of the person, the importance of environmental sustainability, and the importance of human relationships. That is something that we're already doing through the various committees that we have, right, at our chapter. We're doing these things in terms of recognizing the importance of working with people and having committees that focus on the legislation, that focus on the politics, focus on the aging, focus on racial injustices. This is already the work that we're doing. And so it's just connecting it to the global agenda, making it connected, making those connections that what we're doing domestically is aligned with a higher calling, that is the calling of all social workers globally, that we can tap into. What I'm hoping to offer, Barbie, is shifting our lens a little bit to recognize that we are part of the Sustainable Development Goals. We contribute to those goals every day when we do our work. The Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by the United Nations in 2015. And they are ambitious goals. They're also called global goals, right? There are these goals that are supposed to, we're supposed to see the impact by 2030. And so it's like a 15-year, that's why it's these are goals, because they're broad and they're ambitious, but they're also measurable. And they're supposed to hold countries accountable on ensuring that we keep our planet, our world safe. So you have 17 goals. And the United States is part of, committed to those goals. So we need to know that our own country, our own foreign policies are aimed towards achieving these goals. And we are part of the instruments that are going to help us get there because we do the work on the ground. So when you look at goal number 1, for example, poverty alleviation, we're part of that work, right? When we're looking at number 3, which is good health and well-being, which is about mental health as well. So not just physical well-being, but also mental health. It's mentioned in that goal.
Right.
You also have, for example, gender equality. We're still working towards that through gender discrimination and so forth. Clean water and sanitation. I just talked about the importance of recognizing that climate change is a global issue. And that's why there's been a movement now in green social work. And I know Dr. Thomas, Rebecca Thomas from the University of Connecticut has written a lot of literature around green social work, climate change, and that we need to recognize that when certain communities are disproportionately affected by harsh environmental conditions, that's environmental racism.
Yes, it is.
When you're dumping junk into rivers that are affecting particular communities, and it's oftentimes Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities, where we're drilling and dwelling to get resources, it's benefiting another group. It's not benefiting all. And so we have to be able to speak up about these things, right? So that people aren't further, marginalized and oppressed through the environment. Some neighborhoods just look clean all the time and others look unkept. And the contamination around it is just making children sick. And that's what happened, for example, in White Flint, Detroit. That's what it became such a national headline. It's also happening in Hawaii. We didn't even know that. I recently spoke at the University of Hawaii, and I learned about the water contamination there as well, right? Because it's benefiting people to dump stuff there to keep their states cleaner, greener. But who's it benefiting? It's going to affect us all at some point. Our children are drinking this water. So the lead that's found in these water supplies, it's killing us slowly. And so this is not just happening in White Flint or Hawaii. It's happening in Jamaica. It's happening in Guyana. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in other parts of the world. So I'm saying that to say, there are no boundaries physically that keep us from climate change. There is no barrier that can protect us from what's happening around the world. So when we're not aware or paying attention or advocating or making policies around where to dump, what to dump, it's going to kill off humanity, and even like the creatures in the water that we eat for sustainability, for life. We're really we're not tapping into how this is really affecting us as well. We have to recognize that we import a lot of the stuff that we get. And so if the water supply is killing off fish or other things that we regularly bring in, it's going to make a food shortage for us as well. So it's all connected. And I'm giving these really basic examples just to show how connected we really are. You know, everything is a global issue, including climate change. And so I would like for us to be more aware of what are the sustainable development goals. Those of us working in child welfare, it's important to know that, you know, children are still globally very vulnerable. And this is why there are now particular conventions or treaties specifically just around children, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
this is because children are so vulnerable that, you know, we have the Convention of the Rights of a Child. Now, every child welfare worker or every person involved in children's advocacy, whether it's foster care, whether it's, you know, working directly for, you know, an agency that supports children, should be aware of the Convention of the Rights of a Child, which is a universal declaration human right. So what does it look like? What are countries reporting? Because all of these different treaties have committees that meet to talk about the progress made on these issues by country. And it's interesting that countries are expected to, not expected, but they're encouraged to sign and ratify these treaties. Ratify means you're basically saying you're going to do this and you're being held accountable. The United States hasn't ratified some of these treaties.
I know, and again, I'm wondering how, you know, again, how your experience, your work is going to help support social workers being more involved in international global social work, because it's almost it's almost like we can't do our work well here without an understanding and including what is happening in the world, right? Because once a country understands and helps their people, we want to be able to, hey, bring that over here to help us too, right? But if we're not having those conversations, we're not having those relationships, then we're stuck, right? We're not gonna improve. We're not gonna do better for our communities. Just like globally, everyone is trying to do well for their community as well. So with that said, I want to thank you, Stephanie, for joining us today at Q Community Conversations. We're looking forward to seeing you Thursday, March 24th at a Social Work Annual Conference. You'll be our keynote. Once again, the title is "The Time is Right for International Social Work." And we are excited and looking forward to your keynote. And we're also excited for you coming in as our new president, starting in June of 2022 of this year, and also to, again, open up the borders, right? Open up the walls so we can all do this together. This is a world phenomenon, right? This is what's happening in our world. It happens to everyone. And then someone like you is bridging those gaps, right? You're helping to bridge those gaps because we don't do enough. We have a hard time even doing it within states, you know, states connecting to each other, let alone us and other countries. But I want to thank you for your work, and I want to thank you for coming. Do you have anything else to share before we go?
Sure. One question I often get asked is, how can I get involved in international social work? And what I would say to that is network, network, network. Connect with people who are already doing the work that you're interested in doing in particular sectors, whether it's gender-based violence, whether it's global health, whether it's child welfare, whatever the issues are that are near and dear to your heart. I would say connect to people who are already doing the work globally, or people who are domestically doing the work, so that you can have an opportunity to connect and really ask those important questions. The other recommendation I would give is to attend as much as possible conferences that are happening with a global theme. International social work conferences are happening all the time. And so it's good to be connected and to become a member, for example, of the International Federation of Social Workers. And for schools of social work, many of you already are members of the International Associations of Schools of Social Work, which promotes global social work education. And then there's also the International Council of Social Welfare, which allows for individual and organizational membership as well. And as a matter of fact, speaking of sister organizations, the International Federation of Social Work North American Regional International Conference is coming up this March 29th, so mark your calendars. this March 29th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the theme for this year's conference is honoring the Indigenous journey. So it's creating a more equitable North America by honoring our past and acknowledging our present to build our future. And this year's conference is being sponsored by IFSW, and the sessions will focus on honoring Indigenous populations. And it's important to also mention the learning objectives, because this is also an important part of the decolonizing international social work that I spoke about. So attendees will understand the impact of colonization and what it's had on Indigenous communities. You'll also understand the steps needed for integrating advocacy into social work practice, and also understand the complexities surrounding international social work supporting Indigenous persons. And so these are the learning objectives. It is a free event. You don't have to pay. You can tune in from your home. It is virtual. And so I highly encourage everyone to register and to participate, to learn, to listen, to enhance our cultural competence lens, our learning, especially about Indigenous persons, which are very much part of the global social work agenda. So I encourage you all to attend and hope to see you there.
Thank you. And thank you, Stephanie, for coming to Social Workers Unraveling Racism Community Conversations. You will get to see Stephanie Asare Nti on Thursday, March 24th at 8:45. And her keynote is "The Time is Right for International Social Work." Please come join us. Have a good day. Thank you.